Okay. First of all, I noticed I was getting a bit hairy in the last videos, so had to trim. Do is we'll have a look at some of the marine parts that I had to get, the major parts for this anyway. I'll just go through them a little bit with you. And I'm literally waiting on parts here to put on before I start spraying. And there are a few other little bits and pieces to do as well. But pretty much ready for paint, and then all this stuff will be going back on and we'll go through it all. Okay, so we'll look at the major items that you're going to need. Now, because of where I am, it makes, most of these are English parts. I bought them all now because I don't know am I soon going to have to pay duty on them or not. If you're in the US, some of the Bowman factory parts that they use on their marine engines might make more sense. With the duty added here, these work out considerably better price-wise. Most of this stuff is rated to around 240 horsepower, maybe 250. Water temperature here is about kind of between 10 and 19 degrees. It rarely gets any warmer than that. The average is probably about 15, 16. So all this stuff seems to do just fine up to about 250 horsepower just here. The Sherwood pump, that's from the US, all right. You can get them in the UK, but I actually got this from the US. It worked out still about €100 cheaper. It's still a €500 pump, but there have been a lot of complaints about these. Whether they've improved on it at all at this point or not, I don't know. They need servicing or rebuild fairly regularly, but they are probably €1,000 cheaper than the next option. These are used on the Cummins 4BT and the 6BT up to 210 horsepower in the marine one. After that, you'll be looking at getting bigger inlets and outlets on it. These are 1.25 inch. So that's the raw seawater pump. The adapter plate for the gearbox, I mean, that's specific to whatever gearbox and stuff you're using anyway. I'm using PRM 750Ds, which is what I have on my Fords, so they'll just transfer over. It's an SAE number 3 housing on the 45s. So that's 750D to SAE number 3. They're not bad, actually. They only cost about a little over €200. The heat exchanger I've opted for is a CB140, the Bowman CB140. They were used as a Cummins one, I think, on the Thornycroft, some of the older Thornycroft Marinised engines. Which is why they have this to go directly to the thermostat housing, and then that's supposed to go directly to the bottom hose, which isn't what I'm going to be doing, but they still seem to be used fairly regular by other people marinising them. So, and I think that outlet size isn't so important. If you buy a 250 horsepower or heat exchanger suitable for 250 horsepower, that's about the size of the inlets and outlets on it anyway. So I'm just going to reduce this. Actually, no, this is going to go into the bottom of that Mani header. But anyway, I'll get to that later because there's a lot of talk about pipe work later on. Now, as you can see there, that's a Bowman CM600 Mani cooler. Not Mani cooler, sorry, Mani header. So it's your exhaust manifold and header tank in one. That's quite a good saving for me over the factory unit, because I'd be looking at about, these work out a little under €1,000 at the moment. If I was to use the Cummins Marine factory manifold, I'd also need to buy a header tank, and their heat exchanger is about €500 more. So I'd be looking at about another €1,000 to use the factory stuff that Cummins use, and there's also caps and blanks and stuff that where you have turbo options on the other ones, and guaranteed they all cost a load of money. These were primarily designed to use on the naturally aspirated engines, but So a lot of people fit a wedge here. I'll talk about that again later. Um, it's nothing to do with the actual cooling or anything. It's just because of the position of the turbo. So they're all the major items. Of course, as well, another one you need, which I don't have here, and I'm going to reuse off the Fords, is the water injection exhaust elbow, because that's yeah, mine are suitable to be used off the other engine, but you would need them otherwise. Engine mounts as well is another thing, but we'll go through that. We'll go through that separately. Oh, and the marine drive plate again to attach from your crankshaft or your flywheel onto your gearbox. I'm using the same one I have in the Fords, but with a higher torque rating for the Cummins. Again, they cost around the €200 mark as well. I'll show that when one arrives, but I think it's on back order, so it'll be quite a while before I get that. So that's all the major components anyway. Once you have those, at least the bulk of the spending is done. For an engine of this kind of horsepower rating anyway, around the 200 mark. Okay, so it's next day now. First coat dried on quite nicely. Just giving them a second coat there a little while ago. I'm using actually thinned down hammerite this time to paint them. I usually use like tractor enamel or normal tractor paints, but they tend to not be as good at keeping the rust. Especially rust that's been around salt. I painted gearboxes with it before, and it just doesn't seem to have that kind of resistance. And I've never been a huge fan of hammerite for actual rust protection, but it's certainly a very hard paint. I'm going to do the valve culvers separately. I'm actually going to spray it in black, and I've painted all around the exhaust outlets and injectors in a black VHT paint, because if you spray that white, it's just going to burn off anyway. But I'm quite pleased with them so far. The paint actually, I thought it was going to go quite matte, but it actually ended up with quite a nice satin finish. And the two mani headers as well. Just gave in the second coat as well. The castings were actually quite coarse, but they seem a lot smoother now that I've got a bit of paint on them. And again, I just taped around where the inlets are on it, because again, that would only go black around where the turbo attaches and on here where it goes onto the manifold. So I'd rather try and keep what paint is on them looking nice. So got them all wire brushed. Took a bit while, maybe 45 minutes or so, but it was easier to take all the paint off than to try and get what was on there smooth. It came off quite easily. The temptation, of course, was to try and polish them now. Started on that one to see just how long it would take, but I have better things to do with the rest of my week, so I'm just going to etch prime all these now, and then we'll spray them all after that. Right, so the first job I'm going to do this morning is to put the front dampers back on so I can turn over the engine, and I want to, because I want to do all the valve settings and give all the valve covers a second coat of paint and paint the engine mounts. The front engine mounts are all I have ready. I'm going to get them painted this morning and get them put back on as well. The mani headers I've just put there out of the way. I need to clean the faces of the intakes on the head, and I also need to get a second set of gaskets to do the second manifold. They're quite a thick gasket that I got with one of these coolers, but I didn't get any with the other one, so I need to order some of those as well. So yep, that's the order of business for now anyway. Okay, so that's all the inlets done on that one. I'm just going to carry on and do all the rest now. You know what it looks like anyway. Okay, so this is the story with the flywheels. These two are DAF 45, and that one there is the DAF 55 one. You can see it's got quite a big recess in it, and it's also a bigger flywheel with a bigger ring gear, so it's a different starter motor as well. These two with the flat surface I can get resurfaced and bored to suit the drive plates. I'm going to get this drive plate recessed in. This is the same one that the Ford had. I'll get the centering lugs removed, and this will just sit in. They're actually going to rebore these for me again. I had a go, but we can select any holes we want to use on this one anyway. So that's the main reason for changing from the aluminium bell housing to the cast iron one. I'm not too concerned about the weight, and it gives me more space under the turbo anyway. So as I talked about previously, I took the two flywheels down to the engineering place and had them surface them, and had them cut a recess to centre the marine drive plate into the face of it. They also drilled these while they were on the lathe and tapped them all as well. This one has double the amount of holes because I had attempted drilling them myself before, and they seemed pretty good, but it wasn't perfectly centered. It was as good as I could get it, but I wasn't quite happy with it, so I was happier to get them to do it again. I did have to pay quite a bit more because they tapped them all, which I had intended on doing myself. So someone had 2.5 hours into just tapping those. But now the drive plates sit perfectly centered and flush into that. So all I've got to do now with these is change the ring gear on that one. I had ordered a ring gear, 127 tooth ring gear for that 45, but it appears this one is wrong. It's just too thick that way, so I've just contacted the place where I bought it now to see what they can do for me. Because there is damage on the ring gear on that flywheel. Otherwise, this one now can go on, which I might do right now. So you will end up doing this job at some point. So putting those back on, I Loctited them all, and it's Loctited to 101 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, I'm sorry about the light in here today. It's pouring rain and miserable, but this is how far we've got today anyway. The valve covers are all cleaned up and back on. Um, Balancer or the tensioners painted and on. Um, New fuel filters, new lift pump, and done that on both engines, and now we've just got the flywheel back on this one as well. So next thing today is to get the second coat of paint on all the engine mounts. And okay, so that's about it for this video. Starting to come together a bit now anyway. Next, the gearbox cooler and one of the drive plates are on their way, so we'll have a look at those when they arrive. And yeah, I'll be looking at getting the manifolds on permanently and getting the turbos set up. So I must do a alteration to the oil feed, and must alter the pipe work as well. So we'll be getting all that sorted in the next video. This is the last week of the season for us as well, so the boat will be coming out probably sometime in the next week or two, and the engines will be lifted out of that. So I'll show you what a cold start on the Fords is like as well before they come out, and the job of craning them out as well. Okay, so cheers and see you next time.